Okay, this week we're going to do the same thing as I did last week. I'll simply be reading the Imagine and the Consider tabs off of your online path book. And then next week we'll start diving into a new section of the series. And as we get into that, I'll be pulling out the whiteboard and teaching a full class. But for this week, I'm just going to be reading what is on your online path book, starting with the Imagine tab. Imagine waking up in the Garden of Eden next to your spouse. You begin to open your eyes again to the sun's welcoming rays while you listen to the soft, soothing shh of the waterfall not far away. Blinking the blurriness out of your eyes, you're surprised at the pile of fruit sitting next to you on the ground. All your favorites. It's your meal today. You hear from the familiar voice of the one who knows. I don't understand, you say, even though you're grateful to not have to go through all the gyrations necessary to get that coconut down from the palm tree. I thought you wanted us to pick our own fruit. Plus, there are still animals to name. There'll be time enough for that, says the one. Today is going to be different. Everything the one has taught you up to this time has always turned out to be true. Each thing you've been asked to do has brought joy and peace and satisfaction. Trusting the one who knows is as natural as breathing. So you reply, okay, why is the fruit already here? I want you to rest today, replied the one. Today you will rest from all your work. See, I've already provided your food, so you won't need to harvest today. We can continue our work with the animals tomorrow. Today is set apart for something special. What's that, you ask, with the feeling of anticipation starting to build inside. It's set aside for us, says the one. You begin thinking about your activities over the past 6 days. You've spent time exploring and learning, first with the one and then with your spouse, and now oftentimes by yourself. I mean, you still spent time sharing your findings with your spouse after exploring on your own. And there's been plenty of time working to cultivate the garden, retrieve the fruit, and, of course, eat your meals. You've even begun learning to build your own creations, starting to subdue the earth as the one had instructed. Scanning through moment by moment in your mind, though, you started to realize that time with the one has become less and less each day. It's easy to do, interrupted the one, knowing your thoughts. I enjoyed work too. I like bringing new things, seen and unseen, into existence. It was enjoyable to work, forming one from another. My greatest joy, though, came on the day that I decided to rest, to look at all that I had done, and reflect on all that had happened. I want you to experience this joy as well. So today, the seventh day, will be set apart for us for just this reason. It will be holy, set apart for us. On the seventh day, God had finished the work that he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all of his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all of the work of creating that he had done. Genesis 2, 1-3, NIV. You may rest from your daily work, reflect upon what you've done since the last day of rest, and experience my rest as well. Always remember that I was with you on those days. Remember what I had done in 6 days. Remember that I am still here holding everything together. It'll help you remember why I created you and the good that I desire for you. It will help us continue to grow closer. You take a moment to think about what the one had just shared with you. The one wants a relationship with you. You're not just another piece of creation. You are different, special, set apart, just like this day. This day is not only different from the rest, it's better. You think about the joy that you experience from having a sense of peace and purpose, exploration and responsibility, and even having someone to share it with. And then you think, I get to spend time with the one who gave this all to me. Just then you hear your spouse begin to awaken, and you notice the pile of fruit waiting for you both. Did you pick these for us? How nice. Even better, you reply. I can't wait to tell you about our day. Okay, I'm moving over to the Consider tab now. This one area is probably the most telling barometer of health in our walk together with God. How do you spend the time set apart by God for building a relationship with God? Think about this statement for a moment. Repeat it so it'll sink in. How do you spend the time set apart by God for a relationship with God? God set apart time in each week as being holy. It's a considerable amount of time. 1 day out of 6 equates to about 14% of the total time of your week. Of course, you and I do sleep at night, another part of God's design for our bodies. So our waking hours will be a smaller percentage of the total hours of the week, somewhere around 10%. There are 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week. That equals 168 hours total for the week. 10% would be about 17 hours set apart for reflecting on our week and building our relationship with God, assuming you sleep the other 7 hours that day. And for most of us, this is a significant investment of time. 10% becomes a significant number God uses in working with us throughout history. Abram gave Melchizedek, a king and priest, 10% of the spoils from the battle after Melchizedek pronounced a blessing on Abram. 11 tribes of Israel were commanded to give 10% of their food to the 12th tribe, Levi, whose full-time work would be in service to the Lord. The tribe of Levi was instructed to give 10%, a tithe of the tithe, to God on the altar. And now, we are reminded that from the beginning, 10% of our time each week is set apart as holy for resting with God. Let's assume that we go to church services sometime on the weekend. Let's also assume the service takes about an hour and that we need to get ready and travel for another hour total. We've spent 2 hours building our relationship with God. Let's also assume we read our Bible every day. In fact, let's assume that we listen to an audio Bible at a rate that would cover the whole book in 3 months. That would take about an hour a day. We've added 7 hours building our relationship with God. How about the other 8? Even praying an hour a day every day of the week, we still fall short of the 17 hours that God set apart for us. Plus, we're stretching it out throughout the week and we're not spending an entire day resting with Him. Now, I'm not walking you through these numbers to build a performance-based faith with tasks to be checked off each day. I am, though, trying to help you to see the significance of 10%. It's a lot of time. It's just enough time to force us to pause and think about why it's there in the first place. 10% of our money forces us to consider how we're spending all of our money. 10% of our time forces us to take stock of how we are spending all of our time. Both bring us to the same place. Everything belongs to God, so with everything, we turn to God. There remains, then, a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from His. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. Hebrews 4, 9 through 11, NIV. In an earlier section, I said that walking together with God begins with provision. I said that because it is the first place that we experience the goodness of God in our lives. We turn to the one who provides before we care what the one knows. Even though this is the first place we experience God, it's not really where walking together with God begins. It begins with God. God was before all things. God spoke all things into existence. God formed more things from the things that God spoke into existence. God created the heavens and the earth. God created the Garden of Eden. God made human beings, male and female, in God's image. God placed them in the garden to tend and care for it. God gave them God's perspective to explain God's creation and to warn them about the tree in the middle of the garden. God told them to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. God gave them provision, purpose, perspective, progress, people, and perfection. It all begins with God. God is not worthy of 10% of our time. God is worthy of 100% of our time. Everything that we have is from God, and when we leave this life, everything goes back to God. We are only here for a short time and are entrusted with some resources during that time. Perhaps we should consult God then in how the time and resources would be best spent. One day a week helps us gain and then regain that perspective. One day a week is just enough to keep us from becoming narcissistic, egotistical, or our own gods. One day a week will remind us that the fate of the world does not rest in our hands, but in God's. One day a week will stop us from making work more important than our God. One day a week will remind us to love rather than fight our spouse, children, friends, neighbors, and enemies. One day a week will make all the difference in the rest of the week if we let it. God has already set one day apart for us. Will we set it apart for God and pause?